Okay, so we're going to go into our opening plenary, seeing eye to eye, a conversation with Asian regulators. Before I begin, can I kindly invite my three speakers to come on stage. Pak Iman Rahman, President Director, Indonesia Stock Exchange. Mr. Michael Tang, Head Listing, Policy and Product Admission, SGX Redco. And Mr. Uradine Singh, Director of Banking Supervision Department 2, National Bank of Cambodia, Sustainable Finance Working Group. And we have with us as well on our screens, dialing in virtually from Malaysia, Datin Seri Sunita Rajakumar, Chair, Climate Governance Malaysia and Adjunct Professor in Climate Governance and Sustainability, UNITA International University. Some of you might have expected that Professor Tomiko was meant to be addressing this plenary. Unfortunately, he had an accident yesterday and had to excuse himself from this plenary. So I decided to step in his place. But he did send his apologies and he hopes to be with us the next time. Okay? All right. Hi, Datin Sunita. How are you? Fantastic. Can you hear us well? Oh, okay, we can't hear her. If we could just get her voice, her volume up. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Perfect. Okay. Now, as the opening plenary, a very important conversation in the sustainable finance landscape, the folks who are in charge of the carrots and the sticks. I just wanted to recall back in, I think, 2016 or 2017, the Singapore Exchange did a survey, which I continue to talk about even today. They found that when they ran a survey amongst investors globally, more than 90% of investors gave a feedback that they are looking for environment, social governance related information. Very important statistic, 90% is not a small number, but also I think on top of that, subsequently they found that more than 75% of these 90% would potentially divest from projects that they felt they were not confident about. And I think this actually sparked a very important trend. Since then, SGX had gone onto the bandwagon and announced really tough measures at that time, on Comply Explain for listed companies to disclose on their ESG reporting. At the same time as well, Malaysia did the same, alongside that Hong Kong. So that was around 2017 or so. And since then, of course, the rest of the region has not looked backwards. It's pretty much all systems go. As CEO Desmond Quek said earlier, everything, everywhere, all at once. I think many of us who are in this room are part of that struggle, trying to understand the regulatory landscape that's taking place. Very hopeful as well, because on top of the regulations that come in, the central bankers as well have come on board in many of our ASEAN markets and really taken things by the horns. Today I have with me 4 regulators, as well as Datin Sunita, who sits in Malaysia. She is technically not a regulator, but she sits on many boards, and as well as in her capacity as the chair of Climate Governance Malaysia. She does have a lot of strong insights from her, I would say, representation in Malaysia as well. So collectively, all of us represent about 688 million people in the region. That's twice the population of the US, just for context. Okay? All right, so allow me to get going on the questions. And if I could just get started on a very important topic today, which is the energy transition. The energy transition is increasingly being discussed through the lens of inequality in Asia. The global economic transformation is disrupting sectors everywhere, but also impacting on livelihoods, as I mentioned earlier during my opening remarks. This is not an excuse, though. We absolutely have to transition, but we need to think of our people and also how they can essentially feed themselves and their families. So how can we ensure that this transition is equitable and with no one left behind? Perhaps I could start with Pak Iman. Very exciting to see all the developments on G20 this year and last year as well with the JETP. If you could just share a little bit of updates on that front. Any developments since then?
Yeah. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to be thanks and be honored to be here today. Good morning for any distinguished ladies and gentlemen. First of all, maybe that if you are aware that a couple days ago, IDX has been licensed to become an IDX carbon. So since a couple days ago, Indonesia has set up their own carbon exchange. And then at the same day, we do a trading already. So we did a carbon trading on last Wednesday. Is about 450,000 tons CO2 equivalent. And then at that time, the price of the carbon of the trading, because we provide a mechanism of 4 mechanism of trading. One is we call it as a regular market, like the one, because we also in the IDX cash equities exchange. So we have a regular market. We also have a negotiated market. We also have like a auction market, and the last one is the market platform. And then when we did on Wednesday, the first day of trading, it was inaugurated, was launched by our president, Mr. Jokowi at that time. It was traded, as I mentioned to you, that 450,000 tons CO2 equivalent at the time, and the pricing is about $4.7 per ton. And then at the end of the day, the pricing about more than $5. And then the participant is about 16 participant or user, and 7 of them is a banks. So this is the recent update on the energy transitions. And then the project at that time is a geothermal. It's a geothermal power plant owned by Pertamina, the SOE of oil and gas in Indonesia. So I think the development of G20, I was in Pertamina before, so when I joined the G26 at that time, the energy transition, I think in Indonesia have been moved forward because we commit with our NDC not only by having like carbon allowance, carbon offset, but one further step that we start with the carbon trading as well, with the IDX carbon exchange. Thank you.
Very exciting. Well, if some of you missed the news, as he mentioned, as Pak Iman mentioned, 2 days ago, IDX had launched their carbon platform. They're not alone, of course. In this region, we've got several already underway. But what is exciting, of course, is this is the space to watch. Let's hold that thought there and move a little bit. Allow me to just ask our Cambodian expert here, Mr. Yurandain, you just came back from New York last week, and I understand you attended the UN General Assembly. Tell us about your representation there as a representative of a regulation from the regulatory perspective in Cambodia.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, and great to be here, and great to be among all the private sector. So I feel like I'm the one who just jumped into the different world, so facing a lot of distinguished investor. So yeah, actually we had this side event in New York, and along with the UN assemblies, talking about the gender lens financing. So this is a bit of, out of topic today, but it's still is the purpose for the equitable growth that we have to taking care of. So this is something we are not looking only the goal for the sustainability, but also we have to put a gender lens. So if you are looking on the sustainability investing, bear in mind that this is the gender lens need to be incorporated in your investment. So this is something that we want to send a message to the investor as well. So you have two goals to hit right now. So the climate change, and also something you have to address the gender dimension in your investing. And then I think we quite having a good discussion over there, so talking about the role of technology, about the innovation, how we can have the impactful investment for the women entrepreneurs, and also we want to have the role of the women and girls in all the economic development. So by empowering the women in the process, so we can increase the GDP, not just only, having investing, traditional investing alone. So,
Yep. Yeah. Thank you. Well, that was, as Mr. Eurodine had talked about, gender lens is an unusual topic in a sense, but it is very much related to a lot of the work that's being done on the impact investing side, especially on the thematic investing. On that front, maybe I'd like to turn my question to Mr. Michael Tang. SGX Reco has a suite of new policies coming through over the years, one of which was even the board diversity policy as well. I think a lot of people are very eager to find out what Singapore is doing, because we are sort of the country that's making all these bold moves. And one of which that has also sparked some attention was the movement on the climate risk side of things, ensuring that more and more companies not only report on climate-related risks, but now increasingly even the Taskforce for Nature Financial Disclosures potentially coming on the radar as well. Tell us a little bit more about, the thinking here. What is SGX aspiring to?
Well, firstly, thanks for having me here, and I think it's quite heartening to see I've been participating in quite a few of these annual summits that you've organized, and I think the scale has just grown and the discussions have just deepened over the years. And I think it's also a reflection of the discussions taking place in the capital markets, where I think investors, like you mentioned in 2015, 2016, are asking for more sustainability information to be incorporated into their investment decisions, until today, where I think the ask is even more specific. What about you doing about climate? And I think this global push for climate is one of the reasons why we've asked our companies to provide climate disclosures in 2021. I think since then, there's been global convergence in terms of the reporting standards that are out there. The ISSB, or the International Sustainability Standards Board, have come out to put out a global baseline standards for sustainability reporting. Now, for many years, we've been hearing investors say that companies are using different frameworks, putting out different types of information, and they can't compare the different disclosures. And I think this move to create a global baseline is really an important one for everyone, because it then creates that consistency in information disclosures that capital markets everywhere would need. I think particularly for Singapore, I would say we are not a price maker in standard setting. In many sense, we look at what international standards there are and try to adapt them. But I think in this instance, in coming up with the ISSB standards, what we've done is to bring together a coalition of Singapore participants, including investors, companies, academic, consultants, experts, to give inputs and feedback to the ISSB in the design of their framework. And that is, of course, the Sustainability Reporting Advisory Committee. I think some of the members are here as well. So thank you for your contribution. But really, I think what we've done is to bring Singapore and to some extent ASEAN Asian perspective into global standard setting, and hopefully arrive at a consistent and common set of global standards that every country, every region can use.
Very valuable there. I'm picking up on a very important trend. It's actually the feedback coming back to the standard setters around the world. This is not uncommon, of course, but I think Singapore, having done this for a few years now, we might have even enough data, enough feedback from consulting firms and from folks on the ground who are reporting to really tell them what's working and what isn't as well. Okay, I'm going to then turn my attention to Malaysia now. Sunita, you are the chair of Climate Governance Malaysia, and you've been on so many boards right now, dealing with so many different types of companies across different industries. Tell us a little bit more about, in Malaysia, do you feel that it's more of a carrot or stick approach that is moving along the national priorities?
Hi, Janice. It's great to be here. So we advocate to boards of directors, but closely engage with other key stakeholders, including ministries and regulators. And in Malaysia, I feel regulators in the whole have been ahead of the curve. They recognize the crisis informed by science. We're facing multiple tsunamis, and this is where the concepts of double materiality, dynamic materiality come into play. capital markets are forward-looking, and central banks recognize the systemic risk on the financial system. However, I would also like to ask, and in my conversations with them, whether regulators are fit for purpose, whether they are future-proofing their ecosystem of stakeholders, because there is a reputational risk for getting of lagging behind. So can we also seize this opportunity to actively facilitate the transition which all society wants? For example, by providing access to data so that informed decisions can be made about the allocation of capital, organizing national climate risk dashboards, having standardized scenarios, including climate endgame scenarios, which takes into account geopolitical tension, food security issues, mass migration, disputes over freshwater resources. So I see this bifurcation in industry when you are speaking about carrot and stick approach. Stick for those who think that this is still a passing fad and that it's an allocation of resources and expense line item, and a carrot for those who are seizing the opportunity to create value. And I see that this is a similar analogy with regulators. Those who are deep in the weeds of the alphabet soup of reporting frameworks and taxonomies, whether assurance is needed, whether the appetites for reporting timeframes, and all of this is veritable bonanza for consultants. And those regulators who are looking at the opportunity of participating in and helping to facilitate the reset of the industrial base. Back to you, Janice.
Thank you very much, Sunita. Very true indeed. And I think ourselves, working with a lot of listed entities, the struggle to really understand what exactly they have to report on the climate risk front it's not an easy task for sure. And as a regulator, they certainly are in the driving seat to make some of that change. But at the end of the day, it's the quality of the reporting that matters. Okay, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about a very important relationship between the regulators, the private sector, and philanthropic sector. Now, a very commonly used term that we're hearing a lot more these days is blended finance. Of course, that's, combining development finance with philanthropic funds, for the purpose of addressing sustainable development goals. Now, in ASEAN in particular, this is definitely of interest. And I think earlier when Google shared some of their projects as well, a lot of it does have blended finance elements or a potential in there too. I'd like to find out from my speakers here, what do you perceive to be the role of the regulator to maybe perhaps foster a little bit more of the blended finance perspective? Of course, your markets are all different. They're very different, I would say, unique selling points, but maybe share a little bit about what's being done in that sense.
I think in Indonesia, for instance, that in terms of what regulators have done is that we are preparing the ESG reporting. I think we are, as maybe our colleague from Singapore, SGX, that we started with our FSA, Financial Service Authorities, OJK. They started to 2017 with the ESG regulators. So I think having the blended financing instrument, they push the listed company to become more transparent and more ESG conscious. That's why I think when we launched the IDX carbon exchange, the perceive of our listed company is quite good. So as I mentioned to you that there's 16 participants, most of them is listed companies. So they see that this is an opportunity not only regarding the carbon itself, but this is the opportunity for them to promote for their listed company that they are promoting the sustainability, and also hopefully they can get the cheaper financing as well and get perspective of investor relations when they did the roadshow, non-deal roadshow, when they did as a listed company. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, very important. Michael, anything you'd like to add?
I was just going to add that I think Desmond did give an overview of, I think, the problems that we face in Singapore on blended finance and how Philanthropy Asia's Alliance is bringing together partners to try to collectively solve the problem, not necessarily in a sequential manner, but really trying to understand and get started at it. I think this is where maybe capital markets and securities regulators regulators can also play a role in offering the availability of the capital markets as another platform and as another source of funds for blended finance. Now, I think a lot of times this probably starts at the private stage with the banks, with the philanthropic funds that will identify projects and provide some form of credit enhancements or capital support in order to bring a project into a bankability or investable state of affairs. But I think in trying to leverage on the capital markets, you would reach out to even more investors, have access to even a wider pool of funds, and potentially even make the change faster. So I think at an appropriate stage in time, looking at securitization of some of these projects into a capital market project, into, for example, a transition bond or a green bond, that would be very useful in catalyzing this pace of development even more in blended finance. And I think this is one area where securities regulators can get involved in the conversation, be part of the alliance and partnership, and really try to problem solve for the next stage of development.
Very valuable indeed. Yeah, I think it really requires a lot of players, hands on deck, to really make some of these happen, but also to be astute about opportunities. Cambodia, I think, it's really interesting to see that there's already I guess, traction in your market, given that sustainable finance is still relatively new in that sense. And yesterday when we spoke about it, you were very upfront about some of the challenges on the ground. Perhaps share with our audience, what are some of the challenges that continue to, be present, but at the same time, what are the aspirations from the central bank?
Let's talk about when we embarked the journey of sustainable finance in Cambodia. So we started in 2016 when we endorsed the National Bank of Cambodia and the Ministry of Finance endorsed Cambodian sustainable finance principle for the private sector to adopt that principle and then translate that principle into their business action, their business strategy, their operation. So we can see the interest of the banking and financial sector at the early stage. But since we come to the point that a lot of people still questioning what we need to do with the sustainability agenda. So everyone don't really understand what we need to do, like Kate was mentioning. So what's your take in terms of sustainability? Which direction you want to go? So they are now listening. They are waiting to hear from the regulator, from the National Bank of Cambodia, from the capital market to kind of like understand the vision and the direction of the regulator, which way you want to go. Like for now, as a regulator for the National Bank of Cambodia, we are developing our sustainable finance roadmaps, kind of a set of vision for the industry. This is something that we're looking into. These are the pathway that we want to go. So like be ready and then be part of the process. So and also we are working on the taxonomy. We understand we're having a regional taxonomy, Asian taxonomy, but we think it would be good to contextualize based on our country situation. So we are developing our own taxonomy, and also we are working on the disclosure standard. Of course, we understand there's international standards being set by ISSB. But still, we think there would be something that we need to take on from our own system to make sure our local bank, financial institution, and businesses understand what would be their ability, what would be their capacity to take on this. And also, we taking this opportunity, I want to request from the private equity or private investors to kind of understand and look at the small country and the emerging country like Cambodia, for example, and like Laos, Myanmar, in a way that we are not at the stage as an advanced country. So if you try to bring us up to the international standard, so it's not going to make sense for us. So have to be something that more practical for a country like Cambodia, like Laos, like Myanmar. So of course you unlock capital from somewhere else, but you have to make sense to apply in a country like us. So we have like you're talking about the carbon market. So we one of the supplier for the carbon market as well. So this is something we don't want our natural resource to be compromised by the the use of other treatment for. For example, you investor, you try to buy the carbons from an emerging country, from a small country. Make sure the pricing of the carbon is commensurate with our development goal, because we are the small country, we are the emerging country. We want something good for our country as well. We want something to develop to meet our development objectives. So making sure the price fair enough to commensurate with that. So,
yeah. Very realistic challenges there, and I think you have great insights. Cambodia is a challenging market, no doubt, but also one that has fantastic natural resources. And from a carbon perspective, of course, in terms of biodiversity credits, Cambodia is indeed one of these markets that, I would say have very, very good potential projects. But of course, at the end of the day, it really lies in making sure that the quality of these credits can really eventualize. Now, if I could just turn my attention again to Malaysia. Sunita, I think what's really important is a lot of people in Malaysia today are waiting, for more regulations to come in. And I think the reality of the ground is that listed companies, not just in Malaysia, but perhaps even in the rest of ASEAN, are waiting for regulators to tell them more of what they have to do. Do you think it's a good approach? And also, where do you see are the gaps that are holding companies back from actually meeting their disclosure requirements?
Yeah, that's such a good question, Janice. So Bursa has been advocating sustainability in general for many years. Our FTSE for Good was launched a year before Paris in December 2015, and TCFD specifically in the last few years. They have regular consultations with multiple stakeholders. The larger companies have already adopted, but there are challenges, including the lack of standardized scenarios and national climate ambitions. So I think there are challenges, and for me in particular, adaptation needs. You might be winning awards for your sustainability reporting, but if your country isn't ready to adapt to a warmer world, then you are going to be affected drastically. We're talking extreme heat days, freshwater crisis, food security, flash flooding, which leads to landslides and sinkholes. All of this is going to affect your sovereign credit rating, and capital is going to be diluted. And Yuridan Singh, really struck a note, because this crisis is simultaneously simple and yet extremely complex, just as the effects are foreseeable and yet unpredictable. So the facts are, just as the UN Secretary General has reiterated again in the last few days, that the G20 are responsible for 80% of emissions. But of course, it's clear all countries need to decarbonize. All countries need to adapt to the warmer world. And all businesses and industries need to find significantly more sustainable ways to live and work. So while there is growing momentum for what came from Google called carbon-free energy contracting, there are huge opportunities for makers and private sector to reset the industrial base, because subsidizing fuel at the pump, subsidizing fresh water, our exorbitant privilege of wasting food, where our cheapest calories are junk food, having microplastics in our respiratory system, food chain, digestive tracts, cardiovascular, all of this is not sustainable. Having rising mortality arising from air pollution, the rise in allergies, and to measure the effects of the climate crisis on human beings. So we need to price carbon, the negative externality, but the conversation has been somewhat hijacked by renewable energy and blended finance that we need. Energy efficiency is much more important. We can all halve our electricity bills, for example. So there are many challenges, and foremost amongst that is lack of almost real-time data for us to make informed decisions. But I'm confident that we can work around the challenges.
Thank you, Sunita. Really strong points there. And the one thing I picked up, of course, besides that G20 is responsible for 80% of emissions, this is why there's so much heat we're getting. Important point, I guess, is the role of the carbon markets, I would say. Pricing carbon, should we do it? What can regulators do? Any of you can comment on that. What are we going to do about carbon? Are we going to regulate it more? Are we going to ensure that listed and non-listed companies, are dealing with internalizing some of these externalities that they've been sourcing out for a long time? And I guess in that context, carbon markets or the platforms.
Yeah, in Indonesia, again, regarding carbon market, there's a regulation mentioned that they are not allowed to do the OTC market. They have to go to the carbon exchange. So there's a moratorium regarding that. The carbon has been sold, the OTC market before, have to be regulated and traded to our carbon market. Why is good that our carbon trading is connected with our registry? So meaning that every country can control their NDC. So that's why I think the most important thing of the carbon exchange that one country can control about the NDC to fulfill their NDC commitment by 2030. So this is something that in Indonesia, we just started a couple of days ago. We'll see. And hopefully we can commit on our net zero emission reduction by 2060 or earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Iman. Very important. Yes, indeed. You must have the long-term goal. Michael, I know I shouldn't be airing you on Climate Impact X because you don't represent them. But I think a lot of people in the room are probably curious about the concerns that we all have around greenwash. Greenwashing, of course, still occurs even in the sustainable finance space, and this is also why taxonomies are that important to regulators, to the banks, because we have to find a way to define green in a compatible, in a benchmarkable manner. What does SGX, envision us to do about this issue of greenwashing?
Well, I think it is definitely a concern if you're looking at the lens of an investor trying to assess whether or not certain claims that a company has made is true as to its, say, green credentials, as to its emissions numbers, as to what it is doing. Then it is a concern for the capital markets if the information is misleading, if it is false, if it has caused the investor to react in a way that it would not have if it had the right information, right? So that is putting a very, I think, traditional analysis of the issue of greenwashing using a capital markets lens. We're looking at investor need for information and then whether or not this information is indeed true. But I think when you drill down to it, the real difficulty is how does an investor react to an information? What does an investor use to assess whether or not the, say, performance standard is correct? If it is not something that is blatant, for example, a wrong information, say a wrong emission number that's far out from the actual fact. If it's not that, then we're really looking at sustainability performance, right? And then agreement on what is a correct threshold that should be met to be considered to be green. And then I think that's where I think taxonomy comes in to provide that common consensus on what is a, I think, I would say, a correct threshold for you to be called a green activity, to be called an activity that's aligned to international consensus. And because it's still developing, I think investors also have a hard time trying to assess whether or not particular claims are accurate. But I think what I would tell companies is to really evaluate the disclosures or the reports that you're putting out. Think about what terms like green, net zero, if carbon efficiency really means to you, and explain what they mean to you instead of using these terms. Because so long as there's no consensus on what these terms mean, then different investors may take away different things from what you say. So for well-meaning issuers, companies that's trying to convey to their investors, to stakeholders what they're doing, I think maybe be more specific about what you do. In the meantime, I think these standards on reporting on the taxonomies will develop, and hopefully we'll get at a better place to assess all these allegations.
Thank you, Michael. Really good points, actually. And just for context, we read last week that the EU is planning to be banning the use of carbon neutrality, for the fact that it is a term that can mislead investors, mislead stakeholders into thinking that a particular project or an investment or a fund is green when actually it could not be as well. So this is something that's of concern, not just in this part of the world, but globally speaking as well. We are going to see a lot more scrutiny onto such claims. Yeah. Okay, now it's time for Q&A. And if I could just remind all of you to scan on your cards, if you do here, you can scan your neighbor's ones. Slido, if you can see on the bottom left, Slido, we've got questions, or you can ask your questions as well. And we're going to take most of your questions if we can, but if not, I'll combine some of them. Thank you for your understanding. Okay, we've got one already come in. Will you be adopting the latest TNFD framework into disclosure requirements to the regulators? Okay, there was no specific who they're asking this to, but I think this applies to everybody here. So important question, Taskforce for nature-related financial disclosures. What is our take by the regulators?
Maybe I can start with this. I think to the extent that biodiversity is important to a company's business, then already it is something that a company should be disclosing in its sustainability report without more. But I think what the TNFD does is to give a framework that's very aligned to the TCFD in terms of looking at the types of information that investors would require, and also I think more specificity as to the types of biodiversity risks that may affect a company. So to that extent, I think if biodiversity is something that's important to a company, then it should already be disclosing it in its reports, and the TNFD gives the company a better framework and better understanding of the issue. I think what we have been looking at so far is the adoption of ISSB, because as I've mentioned, it provides that common foundation for reporting for global markets. And what the ISSB has done is to put out a general conceptual framework for sustainability reporting and a more thematic set of standards for climate disclosures. And the ISSB is now consulting on its roadmap for its work going into the future. What are its priorities for development of the ISSB standards going into the future? For example, also including topics like biodiversity, natural capital, human rights, human capital. So I think for a start, the global capital markets would, benefit from adopting the common foundation of ISSB disclosures. And as and when these ISSB standards grow and develop into more specific themes or specific requirements, and that would be a natural stage and phase in which I think markets can consider adopting these on a mandatory basis for global markets.
If I could just probe one more question, Michael, on that. Is that sort of a short-term perspective, or do you think over the longer term, things might change?
I think this is a long-term roadmap for how we wish to implement sustainability reporting into our ecosystem. We started in 2016 looking at it without a framework, without a specific reporting framework in mind. And since then, I think there's been TCFD, there's been ISSB. So I think what we need to do is to make sure that the pace of development of frameworks is appropriate and at the same level as the adoption by our companies. So our companies also need a roadmap for how to adopt all these requirements. And what we've done at SGX is really to play a balancing role between what's important and crucial for companies to do now, but also with an eye to the long term.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I've got another question that came in. This is an interesting one. There is an inherent tension between attracting capital to exchanges and strict enforcement against greenwashing. Do you see enforcement actions increasing? I think it's a very interesting question because the role of a regulator, of course, is to manage your listed companies. At the same time, ensure that your exchange itself attracts capital. So there's a bit of a what should I do to ensure I can manage greenwash at the same time. Any thoughts on? Yeah.
Maybe I can speak to that as well. I think it's no different from any other issue, regulatory issue that you might throw into this mix, right? As exchanges, there is of course a commercial angle to it to attract more companies for listing, but at the same time there's a regulatory angle to it to make sure that standards are tight, that companies are complying with the requirements, and there's this, well, apparent inherent contradiction in terms. But maybe I would quote what one of my ex-chairmen said about this issue, which is that really you're looking at two sides of the same coin. If we do not have a well-regulated market, then we wouldn't get the flow of companies that wish to list that would want to list in Singapore. So in order to attract companies, we in fact need strict regulation. Well, not just strict, but I think balanced regulation that's appropriate. Specifically for greenwashing, I think if I go back to what I say, to the extent that there is blatant errors in disclosures, for example, wrong emission numbers that's far out from actual fact, then these are real problems that I think you would see enforcement action already in, I think, other markets, especially in Australia. I think there's been quite a few enforcement action by their statutory regulators on disclosures within the prospectuses or circulars that companies issue, because there are factual, blatant errors, mistakes. Companies saying that they've done something when in fact they've not done so, or company giving a perception that this is what they're doing when in fact they're not. So I think you would see disclosure, enforcement action coming up if companies are not careful about the greenwashing risks that I've just mentioned.
Thank you. On that front, I must ask this next question around the role of a regulator for third-party verification. I'm sure a lot of you here, can resonate with the questions about whether or not the regulator should be doing more to ensure that third parties, perhaps do a bit more on the assurance front, but just to verify that the claims that are made, are exactly what they position themselves to be. So what is the role of the regulator for more compulsory third-party verification?
I think maybe I'll try to answer the questions that in case of Indonesia, I think we try to have like a third-party verification to make it independent for the exchange. We start to see the third party to doing all the verification in terms of listed companies. We try to encourage them to do the third party verification. So as my colleague Michael mentioned, that in Singapore that we should have a balance, because as you mentioned today that in the listed company they have to be balanced, relating to the greenwashing as well.
Yes.
So I think this is something that we try to do for the third party. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Iman. I have a question that I think I would like Sunita to answer. It's because when I first met her many years ago, in fact, we were on a panel on board diversity. Many years has passed since, and I'm so glad to see Sunita sitting on many boards. But a very important question, of course, is how can we see more diversity on ASEAN boards today? Sunita, any perspectives here? I'm sure you've been fighting for that for a long time. Is she frozen?
How can we see more diversity on boards?
Yes.
Okay, gosh, that's a question that I wasn't prepared for. I thought we were here to talk about climate and sustainability. But yeah, this is definitely something that I've been advocating for as well. Because if there's a systemic bias or discrimination within your organization, so that the very best of talent simply cannot float to the top, that there's some block or some glass ceiling that's preventing them, then you cannot get the assurance that you have the best quality conversations in the boardroom lead to the best informed decisions, right? So you want as many diverse points of view. So aside from gender diversity, you really want to be talking about cognitive diversity so that you can assure yourself that in the board, you're rigorously debated and discussed all the issues on an informed basis, and that the best decisions are being made. So it really is in the best interest of the company to ensure that your best talent have as much development opportunities as possible. But Eunice, if I can also take the opportunity to just jump in on the earlier questions on regulator accountability. Regulators on the whole have been ahead of the curve, and this is the important signaling that they have given the absence of specific national targets. And I think this is why regulators are highly regarded in the region. But without accountability, and this is where we need to have a closer look at real-time data for informed decisions, the ability to compare, as the speaker from SGX has been saying, Michael, and adaptation needs. And this means regulators need to engage much more closely with line industries, right? Because the United Nations panel of experts commissioned in Glasgow, reported at Sharm el-Sheikh, this is all the beginnings of legal liability. And there's going to be increased climate litigation as patients wear thin and as the worst effects of the crisis are beginning to be understood, including warming, which is accelerating in the carbon budget, is defeated. And you have the background where science is sufficiently mainstream. So it'll be very difficult otherwise and disclaim responsibilities. And this also relates to the regulator as well. So I think within the regulatory ecosystem or within private sector and industry, overlaying the conversations we've had today is that we really need to see much more courage and critical thinking skills. We're facing uncharted territory, just going to reward brave as it were. And we need bold, multi-stakeholder engagement to be able to make smooth and just transition.
Thank you. Thank you, Sunita.
Can I add this
Please,
board
Patiman, go ahead.
questions? I think a month ago that the CEO of Stock Exchange in Asia, we met in Thailand a month ago that since last 3 years, we start to have a standard of ESG. The point of ESG is standard between Asian Stock Exchange. So in one point of the ESG, so the disclosure of E, S, and G, that we try to have a standard for the disclosure of our listed companies. It's about the board diversity. So meaning that, yes, the answer that we start to change. I mean, we have the standard within the Asian Stock Exchange. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I don't have any more time for questions, but if I could just get each of the speakers to perhaps just give one line to the audience here, obviously who are made up of business leaders, financial leaders, people who are waiting for regulators to make another call on an important direction they're setting. What is the one thing you'd like them to remember from your market?
Yeah, I think for us, because we're just launching the IDX Carbon, we hopefully that the IDX Carbon is one of the tools to fulfill our NDCs. And then by having the carbon market that, as I mentioned to you earlier, that we can fulfill the net zero emission by 2060 or earlier.
Thank you. So pay attention to IDX's carbon platform. Lots to expect there. Michael?
Maybe I'll expand on what Desmond said earlier about how companies should focus on both sustainability and profits. I think increasingly we're seeing that sustainability would affect profitability. So I hope what the audience would take away is that sustainability equals profits. Sustainability
equals profits. Nice one, Michael.
I think I'll pick on the first conclusion that's been made earlier during fire chats. So I think as a regulator, as a policymaker, we have done our job. So let private sector don't have to wait. So let's do the best you can. And then we don't want to hear your narrative anymore. We want to see your practical action. So as a regulator, we try to lay down the foundation. So we build the ecosystem for you to grow. So let's start.
Okay, no talk, more action is what Jordan is saying. Thank you. Good one. Sunita, you have the final word.
And so for regulators in the region, I would encourage them to continue strongly signaling to other stakeholders, especially governments and the political leaders, because they are at the forefront. They need to be accountable and to signal strongly to them. Thank you. Dennis.
Thank you very much. Signal strongly to the ones that matter. Okay, with that, allow me to say thank you to our speakers. Fantastic start. Thank you, Pakiman, Michael, Jordan, and Sunita.